Have you been bunking classes or sleeping during your class? I'm just kidding. If you missed out on your class or if you find the concepts difficult, then you're in the right place. Welcome to Tallied. I'm Kiran, and in today's video, we're going to discuss a few unique questions on process costing. I have something special planned for today's video, so wait till the very end to find out what it is, and it's not the quiz this time.
If you have watched the previous videos in this chapter, I recommend you to skip to question 1 using the timestamps in the description below. So far in process costing, we have covered introduction to process costing, how to prepare a process account, accounts after the process account, FIFO method, and weighted average method. And here we are today with the last topic of process costing, a few unique questions. Do watch both the questions because these are different from what we have solved so far and are important from an exam point of view. So get your books, let's solve these questions.
Here we have our first unique question. So in the question, they have given us wages, power, steam, and other expenses for 3 different processes. So the question reads, in a factory, the output passes through 3 processes to completion, namely crushing, refining, and finishing. The details are given below for the month of May 2018. Copra purchased 3000 kgs, costing rupees 300,000. Crude oil produced 2500 kg, refined oil 1800 kg, and finished oil 1760 kg. 500 kg crude oil was sold at a cost plus 20% in crushing process. Copra residue 300 kg sold for rupees 10,000 and sacks sold for rupees 1,000. Wastage of 100 kg of refining process was sold for rupees 800. Casks cost rupees 3,000. Oil stored in casks sold for rupees 200 per kg. Prepare all processes account and finish stock account in the books of the company. So why is this question unique? Because this question is unique for 2 reasons. One, because you might come across a lot of terms which you haven't in the previous questions. 2, because this is a case of loss in weight, and during loss in weight, a few treatments are different in our accounts. So let's look into why they are different. Also, till now, we haven't prepared a finished stock account, which we will be doing in this question. Before moving on to solving the question, let's first take a look at what these few terms mean. So first term we have that we come across is copra. So copra relates to coconut, and we make oil out of copra. So this is an image of copra or your coconut. Next, we come across the word sacks. Sacks is very common, and I'm pretty sure you all know. That is these sacks in which coconut can be stored. And finally, the last item, which are casks. Casks are nothing but containers in which oil is stored, just like these. If this is clear, let's start with the question. So our first process is the crushing process. So in our crushing process, we first start off with the copra, which is our raw materials introduced. So we have 2 raw materials introduced, and this is our copra introduced. We have brought in 3000 kgs, costing rupees 300,000 or 3 lakhs. Next, we have our wages, power, steam, and other expenses for the crushing process. So these will be 2 wages, 2 power, 2 steam, and 2 other expenses. I'm quickly going to fill in the amounts for these items. So we have 15,000 for wages, 6,000 for power, 2,000 for steam, and 3,000 for other expenses. Next, we normally go for our normal loss. So normal loss is not specified as a percentage, But they have told that copra residue 300 kgs sold for rupees 10,000. This is likely our normal loss. So we write by copra residue. This is given to us. So copra residue is 300 kgs sold for 10,000. 300 kgs sold for 10,000. Next, regarding our output, we have that crude oil produced is 2,500 kgs, out of which 500 kg crude oil was sold. So our sales we're going to write as by costing P&L, and this will be our sale of crude oil. So 500 kgs of crude oil has been sold. Now, the remaining crude oil will be transferred to the next process, and our next process is the refining process. So we will write by refining process, and this is going to be a total produced 2,500 kgs minus 500 that was sold. So 2,500 kgs was produced, out of which 500 was sold. So being transferred to next process, we have 2,000 kgs. Next, it is mentioned that sacks are sold for rupees 1,000. So the use of these coconuts are over after the crushing process. So the sacks that stored these coconuts are of no use anymore. So we're going to sell these sacks. So we sell these sacks for cash. So we will write by sacks sold for cash, we get 1,000. Before we go on to find our cost per unit, let us first total the units to see if they are equal. So on our debit side, we have 3,000, which is the raw materials introduced. And on our credit side, we have the sum of 2,800. So we notice the difference of 200 kgs. Normally, with these 200 kgs, we will account for as abnormal loss. But this is a case where our product is oil. So in case of oil, it is a very normal thing, or it is likely that every time this oil is processed and prepared through this process, some amount of weight or some amount of oil is lost in the process. This is not an abnormal loss because it happens every single time. So this becomes a normal loss. So how do we account for this? We will write by loss in weight. We know that the difference is 200 kgs. So kgs will be 200, but normally our abnormal loss would realize the value as what we get from our cost per unit. But in case of a loss in weight, we consider this a normal loss. So because this is a normal loss, the amount for this is going to be 0, because normal loss is borne customer. So now that this is clear, I am going to go on to find our cost per unit. So we know the formula for cost per unit, which is total cost minus normal loss realization divided by input minus normal loss units. So first, let's find our total cost, which is the sum of our debit side. So by summing the debit side, we get an amount of 3,26,000. From this, we have to subtract our normal loss realization. So our normal loss realization is 10,000. But by selling sacks, we also realize an amount of 1,000, and we have to subtract this as well. And let me tell you why. So, for example, let's say you bought these sacks for 3,000 rupees. Okay, so I'm just going to assume that these other expenses relate to buying sacks. So I have bought sacks for 3,000 rupees. Now, once I'm done storing these coconuts, I'm going to sell these sacks for 1,000 rupees. Now, I have got this 1000 rupees back and it doesn't form a part of my expenses. What forms a part of my expenses is only the 2000 rupees which I'm losing between these two. So this 2000 will be included when I'm calculating cost per unit. But this 1000 that I have got back, we will subtract from our cost because we have got this money back. If that is clear, we know that we will do 3,26,000 minus 10,000 minus 1,000. We divide this by input minus normal loss units. So our input is 3,000 units. Our normal loss units is 300 and the 200, which is the loss in weight. So I already mentioned how this loss in weight is a normal loss. Let me repeat this in short. So when you're making oil, it is very definite that some amount of weight or some amount of oil is lost always. This is not an abnormal loss because this happens every single time. Just like when you're manufacturing ink, some ink is bound to evaporate. Similarly, when you're making oil, let's say you start off with 1000 kg of coconut. And with 1000 kg of coconut, maybe you're able to make only 800 kg of coconut oil. So this is something that will happen always. So it is a normal loss. And here you have to subtract these 200 units as well. The reason being, normally this 200 units will realize a value which we get from our cost per unit. But in this case, we don't because it is a normal loss. And normal loss is borne by the customer. Let's take a closer look at what happens. So we do 3,26,000 minus 10,000, which is our copra residue, which is sold and realizing 10,000. Our sacks, which is sold for cash, and we get 1,000 divided by 3,000 units minus 300 minus 200. So we have 3,15,000 divided by 2,500. And the reason why we subtracted this 200 becomes clear here, because now we are calculating the cost per unit only for these two items. That is the 500 kg of oil that is being sold and the 2000 kg oil which is being transferred to the next process. We're not calculating the amount for this. So if you notice, the units we have here is 2500, which is the same as 2000 plus 500. So to calculate the cost for these two, we will take the units of only those two items. So by doing this, we get a cost per unit of 126. Let's quickly multiply these kgs with the cost per unit, which is 126. So here for our sales, we have 500 into 126, which gives us 63,000. And for the amount of oil that is transferred to the next process, we have 2,000 into 126, which is going to give us 2,52,000. So let me first total the credit side before I move on to the next process. So on our credit side, we get an amount of 3,26,000, which is the same as our debit side. So we can move on to our process 2, which is our refining process. So in our refining process, our input is the crude oil that was made in the crushing process. So from our crushing process, we transferred 2000 units of crude oil to our refining process. So this we will write as 2 crushing process, 2000 kgs, and the amount is going to be 2,52,000. Next, we have all our expenses relating to the refining process. So we have wages, power, steam, and other expenses. So I'm quickly going to note these down. 2 wages, 2 power, 2 steam, and 2 other expenses. So for wages, we have 12,000. For power, we have 5,000. For steam, our expense is 1,000 in the refining process. And our other expenses in the refining process is 2,000 rupees. Let's go back to the question and see if they have mentioned any normal wastage or normal loss. So here we are given that wastage of 100 kg of refining process was sold for rupees 800. This wastage is our normal loss, which is given to us. So we will write by wastage 100 kg sold for rupees 800. Next, we have nothing mentioned about any of the refined oil being sold like we had our crude oil being sold. So for crude oil, it was mentioned that 500 kg of crude oil was sold, but for our refined oil, nothing is being sold. So we assume that everything is being transferred to the next process. But before that, I would also like to mention that here we saw that 500 kg crude oil was sold at cost plus 20%. So it says that on top of cost, a 20% profit was kept and then it was sold. But here, when we took the amount of 63,000, we took it at cost price, that is 126. The reason being our process account always have the cost prices and not the selling prices, because here we are accounting for our costs in each process. The selling price will be shown in the costing P&L account, which we have done in our previous videos. So here, though it says that 500 kg crude oil was sold at cost plus 20%, this 20% profit will not be shown here because profits or sales value are shown only in our costing P&L, and the process account is where we look at costs of each processes. So here we take the cost price or cost per unit for the sales of 500 units. So in our process 2, we have no sales figure and everything is being transferred to the last process, which is our finishing process. So I'm going to write by finishing process. So for finishing process, we get the units from here. It says crude oil produced 2,500 kgs, refined oil produced is 1,800 kgs. And because none of this produced refined oil is being sold, this entire 1,800 kgs will be transferred to the next process or the finishing process. So we get our units or kgs as 1,800. Now, our next step is to see if both sides are equal. So I'm going to sum the units or kgs. On our debit side, we get 2,000, and on our credit side, we get 1,900. So there is a difference of 100 units. Normally, this would be abnormal loss, but in our case, which is in the case of oil, there might be evaporation or loss in weight. This makes it a normal loss. So we will write by loss in weight 100 kgs, but this will realize no value. Next, we have to find our cost per unit. So before finding cost per unit, we have to Our next step is to find cost per unit. But when we have only one item, that is only the finishing process or by finishing process, which is the transfer to the next process, we can find this just by totaling the debit side and subtracting this 800 amount. So we will get equal to 2,72,000 minus this 800, and we get 2,71,200. Now, why did I do this? Normally, we would have more than one item. Like in our previous case, we had a sales figure of 500 and the transfer to the next process of 2,000 units. So we wouldn't exactly know what would be the distribution and we can't find the balancing figure. So we find cost per unit. But in this case, an easier way would be to find the balancing figure as there is only one item. But let's see if this matches with our cost per unit. So if we had to find the cost per unit, we will use the same formula, which is total cost minus normal loss realization divided by input minus normal loss units. So here we have 2,72,000, which is our total cost, minus our wastage amounting to rupees 800 divided by an input of 2,000 units minus our wastage 100 and our loss in weight 100. Always remember that when there is a loss in weight, it has to be subtracted here along with the normal loss units. So here we will have 2,72,000 minus 800 divided by 2,000 minus 200. So this will leave us with 2,71,200 divided by 1,800. So that means we are finding the cost per unit for these 800 units that are being transferred to the next process. So by doing this, we get a cost per unit of 150.67. So let us see by multiplying 1,800 with 150.67 if we get the same 2,71,200. So here we have 1,800 into 150.67. When I do this, I notice that I get the same figure, which is 2,71,200. So even by doing the cost per unit, I would have got the same answer. Now, let me total this credit side and move on to the third and final process. So with this, we're done with the refining process and we move on to our third process, which is our finishing process. So here in our refining process, all units were transferred to the next process. So that is to the finishing process. So we are going to write to refining process. Kgs we get from here, which is 1,800. And the amount we will copy from right here, which is 2,71,200, which we found out. Next, we have our other expenses like wages, power, steam, and other expenses. Let's quickly jot these down. So we have to wages, to power, to steam, and to other expenses. So we see that wages cost 10,000 and power 3,000. I'm going to write 10,000 and 3,000. Next, for steam and other expenses, the cost is 500 and 500. So that is 500 each. So I'm going to write 500 and 500. Let's go back to the question and see if there are any other expenses. So here they mention that casks cost rupees 3,000. Casks is an other expense. So these casks are nothing but storages or like bottles which store oil, just like this image. These are containers for the oil and they make up an expense. So we have two casks. These casks cost us rupees 3,000. There is no mention for any normal loss weight like we saw in our process 1 or the crushing process. They had mentioned there was a copra residue, and in our refining process or second process, they mentioned there was a wastage. Here, they have not mentioned anything. So let's go on with the output, which is the finished oil. So our finished oil is given as 1760 kg. So these are our finished goods. So we will write by finished goods 1760. So it is very clear that there is a difference of 40, but let's still total the debit and credit side of units. So on our debit side, we have 1800, and on our credit side, we have 1760. There is a difference of 40, and this will make up our loss in weight. So we have by loss in weight 40 kgs, and the amount will be 0. Now, even here, I can simply total the debit side, and I have nothing on the credit side to subtract. So I can simply write my finished goods value as 2,88,200, but I'm going to calculate this using the cost per unit formula, which should give me the same amount. So here I have 2,88,200 minus 0 because there is no value for normal loss realization, divided by 1,800 minus 40. So by doing this, I get 2,88,200 divided by 1,760. So here I'm trying to find out what is the cost per unit for these 1,760 units. So I get a cost per unit of 163.75. So if I multiply 1,760 with 163.75, I should get 2,88,200. So we have 1,760 into 163.75, and yes, we get 2,88,200. I'm going to sum the credit side. With this, we are done with our third and final account. But the question has also asked us for the finished stock account. So this is the first time we will be making a finished stock account in this series of videos. So the format of our finished stock account will be the same, where we have particulars, units or kgs, amount, particulars, kgs or units, and amount. So here, this finished goods from our finishing process is transferred to the finishing stock account or the finished goods account. So here I'd like to mention the finished stock or finished goods is the same. So here, what we transfer is what goes in here. So here I will have to finishing process. My kgs will be 1,760, and the amount will be 2,88,200. Now, this amount or this finished stock will be transferred to our costing P&L. So this will go on the debit side of our costing P&L, and the sales figure will be shown on the credit side of the costing P&L. So these being our costs will be shown on the debit side. As mentioned, all of these are our costs. So here, this cost is being transferred from our finished stock to our costing P&L. So I'm simply going to copy these same values over here. So we have 1,760 and the amount as 2,88,200. With this, I'm going to total this account. And we are done with this question. Let me show you all the accounts once again, so you can just go through and check if you got them right. So we have our crushing process, and this is what the account looks like. we got the cost per unit as 126. Moving on to our refining process, we got these figures. Our finished process or transfer to next process was 1,800 units, valued at an amount of 2,71,200, and we got a cost per unit of 150.67. Finally, in our finishing process, our finished goods turned out to be 1,760 units, amounting to 2,88,200, and we got the cost per unit as 163.75 per unit. Finally, we were asked to make a finished stock account. So here, from our finishing process, goods or oil or the finished goods is transferred to this account. So here, from our finishing process, this by finished goods will be shown as to finishing process, and these costs or these finished goods are transferred to the costing P&L account. And in our costing P&L account, these expenses or costs are shown on the debit side. With this, we are done with question number 1. So let me repeat what was unique about this question. Firstly, the terms. We come across a lot of terms that we don't come across in our normal question, like copra, copra residue, sacks, and casks. So we need to know that copra purchased is nothing but our raw materials introduced. We need to understand that copra residue will be the residue after the crushing process or our wastage. So we show it as a normal loss right here. Similarly, sacks. We need to assume or understand that sacks are used to store these coconut and will be sold off after the crushing process. So sacks sold for 1,000 will be shown here. Similarly, casks. We know that casks are a form of storage because here it says oil stored in casks. So storage or this bottle buying or casks buying will be in the very last process, which is the finishing process. So this adds to an other cost. All these items have been given in the order of the processes. If you notice, we are first given copra purchase relating to crushing process, crude oil relating to crushing process, refined oil, and finished oil. Like the name suggests, they go on to their respective process. And in the details, we have crude oil, which was sold, and we have given a 500 kg units. Coming to copra residue relating to process 1, sacks relating to process 1. From wastage, it relates to refining process or process 2. And from casks, it relates to process 3 or the finishing process. So with this, we can understand what particulars relate to which account. The second difference is that these questions are a case of loss in weight, which means there is an evaporation or a loss in weight, which is a normal loss. That is, these loss in weights happen every time when these processes happen, and it's not an abnormal occurrence or an abnormal loss. So in this case, we take the amount as 0 or nothing is realized. And there are a few changes when we calculate cost per unit, as we saw in the question. The third and final difference is that till now we haven't prepared a finished stock account or a finished goods account, and in this question we have. So if these differences are clear, let's go on to question number 2. So here we have our question 2. Let me first read the question. Chocoman Industries Limited manufactures chocolates. All the ingredients are normally added at the beginning of the process. However, as per industry standards and inherent to the process, it is expected that 5% of the ingredients introduced evaporate during the course of the process. At the end of the month, some chocolates are partially completed, resulting in work in process. The following information is available from the cost records of Chocoman Industries Limited for the period February 2021. They have given us opening work in process or opening work in progress. They have given us material value and conversion cost expenses. They have also given us the cost incurred during the period of the materials introduced, conversion costs, output during the period, and closing work in progress. we are required to prepare process account with relevant working as per the first in first out method. So this is our FIFO method, and we have to prepare a process account and relevant working statements, which means a statement of equivalent production, statement of equivalent cost per unit, and statement of evaluation. Let's see how we're going to do this. I have made a note mentioning which method we're using for this question. And in this question, we're using the first in first out method or the FIFO method. So here we have a statement of equivalent production. Our first item is going to be the opening work in progress. So we see that opening work in progress is 1600 kgs. So I'm going to write opening work in progress in my particulars. So opening work in progress is my input. So I write 1600, and this 1600 units of opening work in progress will go on to become my output. So I'm going to write another 1600. Next, I have my materials introduced. So in the question, I'm given that 10,000 kg of material is introduced. So this I can write as raw materials introduced. Raw materials introduced is an input. And let's see what this will go on to be in our output columns. So these input can go on to become finished goods. So finished goods is our output. And in our question, we are given that the output is 10,220 kgs. But here you need to note that this 10,220 kgs includes the opening work in progress, which goes on to become output as well. So since we have already mentioned 1600 in the output column, I'm going to write 10,220 minus 1600 in the finished goods output column. So this is going to give me 8,620 in the finished goods column. Next, I have my normal loss. So here they haven't called it normal loss, but they have said that it is expected 5% of the ingredients introduced evaporate during the course of the process. That means this evaporation happens every time during the process. So it is a normal loss. So 5% of the input or ingredients introduced means 5% of 11,600. So my normal loss is going to be 5% of 11,600, which gives me 580. Next, I have my closing work in progress. So my closing work in progress is 780 kgs. Now that we're done with the output column, let's total both the input and output columns and see if they match. So on our input column, we already saw that we get 11,600. And as for our output column, our sum turns out to be 11,580. So this means the output column is short by 20 units or 20 kgs. So this is going to be an abnormal loss. So an abnormal loss of 20 units. Now that we have got the abnormal loss, let's go on to find the equivalent production. So first, for opening work in progress, we have been given that materials 100% has been complete, and for conversion cost, 50% has been completed. Now, remember well that for our opening work in progress, if 100% is already completed, for this year, no work is left. So I'm going to write 0% here. And if 50% is already been completed in my opening work in progress, then 50% work is still left. So I'm going to write 50%. And The units respectively will be 0% of 1600, which is 0, and 50% of 1600, which is 800. If you don't know why I took 0 and 50 and not 150, check my previous video on FIFO method and you will find the answer. Next, we have finished goods. Finished goods work done is always 100% because finished goods are completed goods and 100% work has been done on these goods. So 100% and 100%. So I take the units as it is, which is 8,620. Normal loss, nothing is mentioned, and even if anything is mentioned, we always take 0%. It is a common assumption that no work has been done on normal loss units. So 0% of 580 is going to give me 0. Next, we have our closing work in progress. For closing work in progress, we have been given degree of completion, materials 100%, and conversion cost 60%. We take these figures as it is for our closing work in progress. So remember well, while calculating opening work in progress equivalent production, we take 0 and 50 because 100% work has already been completed and 50% work has been completed, which means this year 50% work is left. But as for our work in progress, this 100% work has been completed this year and 60% work has also been completed this year. So 100% of 780 is going to give me 780 and 60% of 780 is going to give me 468. Finally, we have our abnormal loss. If you notice, we have not been given any values for abnormal loss, what percentage of work is completed. If nothing is mentioned, for abnormal loss, we consider 100% of the work to be completed. And the units will be 20 kgs respectively. Let's total the units column to see what we get as our equivalent production for materials and for conversion cost. For materials, we have got a sum of 9,420, and for conversion cost, we have got 9,908. This is clear. Let's move on to our statement of equivalent cost per unit. Our first element of cost is going to be materials. So for materials, we have a value of 13,68,000. So I'm going to write this next to materials, 13,68,000. From this, we are supposed to subtract our normal loss realization. So we have less normal loss realization. And this time, if you look at the question properly, you will notice that 5% of ingredients have evaporated. So on evaporated material or on evaporated units, you will not receive any realization. Simple reason, if you consider the case of clothing and you have extra cloth bits, you can sell these extra cloth bits and realize some amount of value. But as in for evaporated goods, you get no money or no realization. So our normal loss realization is going to be 0 over here. So we take materials as it is. So we take 13,68,000. Our equivalent units for materials which we found in our statement of equivalent production is 9,420. So to find our cost per unit, we will divide this amount by equivalent units to get a cost per unit of 145.223. Next, in our element of cost, we have conversion cost. In the previous questions which we have done, we have always had 3 items: materials, labor, and overhead. And in this question, we have materials and conversion cost. So for conversion cost, our cost is given as 5,99,280. So 5,99,280 divided by the equivalent units, which is 9,908. So the cost per unit will be 60.48. So I'm going to total this to see what our total cost per unit is. So our total cost per unit is 205.707. Our next account is our statement of evaluation. So in our statement of evaluation, we have opening work in progress. Element of cost, we will have materials and conversion cost. Equivalent units, we will take from here. So for opening work in progress, materials, my equivalent units is going to be 0. So we have our opening work in progress and we check under the materials column, we get units as 0. So here I'm going to write 0. And as for conversion cost, my equivalent units is 800. So opening work in progress, conversion cost 800. Cost per unit is going to be 145.22 and 60.48. To get my total amount, I'm going to multiply 0 or equivalent units with cost per unit for both these items. So in our first case, we get 0. And in our second case, we get 800 into 60.48, which is 48,387.6. So we're going to find the total of opening work in progress. We get the same as our conversion cost because materials is 0. Our next item is our finished goods. So for finished goods, again, the element of cost will be materials and conversion cost. Equivalent units we get as 8,620 and 8,620. Cost per unit will be 145.22 for materials and 60.48 for conversion cost. Let's quickly calculate the total like we did before. So we multiply equivalent units with the cost per unit to get the total for materials. We do the same for conversion cost. And we add the both to find our total for finished goods. So our total finished goods turns out to be 17,73,198. Next, we have abnormal loss. So abnormal loss, we again have materials and conversion cost. Units is 20 and 20. So I'm going to write 20 and 20. Cost per unit will be the same, which is 145.22 and 60.48. Multiplying units with the cost per unit. Then we find the total. Our last item for our statement of evaluation is going to be our closing work in progress. So again, we have material and conversion cost. Units are going to be 780 and 468. So 780 for materials and 468 for conversion cost. Cost per unit will be the same. We will multiply units with the cost per unit. Now I'm going to add these two to find what my closing work in progress is going to be. I hope you can keep up with me solving these questions. If required, feel free to pause the video and solve the sum with me. So with this, we are done with our statement of evaluation. Let me just show you the three accounts we have prepared so far. So first, we have a statement of equivalent production. Then we went on to prepare the statement of equivalent cost per unit. And finally, right now we have prepared the statement of evaluation. The last account is our process account. So our first item in our process account on the debit side is going to be our opening work in progress. So always remember, when you're writing opening work in progress in the process account, you have to take the amount from the question and not what we found out from our statement of evaluation. So we know that 1600 kgs is our opening work in progress, and the amount given, be very careful that you take both the amount for opening work in progress given in materials and the amount given in conversion cost. Sometimes the total might be given, but in this question, they have mentioned this amount separately. So opening work in progress materials cost 2,16,000 and conversion costs cost 40,000. So together, this will be 2,56,000. So units is 1,600 and amount is 2,56,000. Always remember not to take your opening work in progress from the statement of evaluation, but from the question for our process account. And even when we're taking from our question, don't take only 2,16,000 because materials is valued at 2,16,000 and conversion costs valued at 40,000. So in our question, we have to take both these together, which is 2,16,000 plus 40,000, which is 2,56,000 in our process account. Next, we have our materials introduced. So raw materials introduced is 10,000 units. So it says 10,000 kgs has been introduced, amounting to 13,68,000. So let me quickly fill in the amount. 13,68,000. Do we have any other expenses? Yes, we have our conversion cost. So conversion cost has come up to 5,99,280. So we have 5,99,280, and this is our conversion cost. Moving on to the credit side, our first item will be our nominal loss. So nominal loss units, we found to be 580, which is 5% of 11,600. So in units column, we're going to write 580, but our amount is going to be 0 because there is no realization value. As I said, evaporation is a nominal loss and evaporation will realize no value. So because of this, my nominal loss realization is going to be 0. So 580 into 0 is 0 itself. Next, I have my abnormal loss. So my abnormal loss is 20 units. And the amount for abnormal loss, I'm going to take from my statement of evaluation. So in our statement of evaluation, we have found abnormal loss to be 4,104.15. So I'm going to fill in this amount. Next, we have our finished goods. I'm going to leave the units and amount column empty so that we can find this as a balancing figure. Our last item is going to be our closing work in progress. So we found that closing work in progress is 780 and amount we take from our statement of evaluation. So units is 780 kgs and we have found a closing work in progress in our statement of evaluation to be 1,41,581. So I'm going to fill this amount 1,41,581. Let's total the units column. The debit side, we get 11,600. And on the credit side, we get 1,380. So the difference will be our finished goods. So let's see what that amounts to. 11,600 minus 1,380 gives us 10,220, which is the output given to us in the question. So output during the month is 10,220 kgs, and that is the exact output we got right here for finished goods. Let's calculate the amount in the similar way. Let's total our debit and credit side for our amount columns. On our debit side, we get 22,23,280, and on the credit side, we get an amount of 1,45,695. So the difference is going to be the amount for finished goods, and this is going to be 22,23,280 minus 1,45,695. When I do this, I get an amount of finished goods as 20,77,585. With this, we are done with the process account, and we have to check if what we got is right. So this is called the checkpoint for finished goods. And how do we do this for the FIFO method? We first take our opening work in progress. For opening work in progress, the amount we take 2,56,000 from our question, which is given to us right here. So we got 2,16,000 for materials and 40,000 for conversion costs. So here I'm going to write is equal to 2,16,000 plus 40,000, which is for conversion costs, plus the opening work in progress we got in our statement of evaluation. That is 48,387.6. So this gives us an opening work in progress value of 3,04,388. Coming to our finished goods, the amount we will take from our statement of evaluation and not from our process account. So in our statement of evaluation, we got finished goods amounting to 17,73,198. So now we have to add opening work in progress and finished goods. So let's see what we get. By adding opening work in progress and finished goods, we have got 20,77,585, which is the same amount we got in our as the balancing figure for finished goods in our process account, which means this question is right. With this, we're done with this question. If you want me to explain how this makes sense, let's look at our statement of equivalent production. So 1,600 kgs of opening work in progress will go on to become the output of finished goods. And the finished goods, we haven't taken the entire output of 10,220, but we have subtracted 1,600, which is the opening work in progress, and we have written this separately. So for finished goods 8,620, we got the value of 17,73,198. So this is the output value for 8,620 kgs. But here we are finding for 10,220 kgs. So for 10,220 kgs, this is going to be our opening work in progress plus our finished goods units, which is 1,600 plus 8,620, which will give us 10,220. So our entire cost for opening work in progress will be 2,16,000 plus 40,000 for the work which has already been completed, which means it has costed 2,16,000 for 100% work of materials, and it has costed 40,000 for 50% work in conversion cost. And the remaining work was done this year, for which we have calculated the costs in our statement of evaluation. As materials were already completed, 0% or zero amount is spent this year, as 2,16,000 will be the final amount for material cost. As for conversion, last year we had spent 40,000 for 50% work, and this year we have spent 48,387 for the remaining 50% work. So our total work in progress expenses amount to 3,04,388, to which we add our finished goods amount for 8,620 units, and we end up finding the amount or expense for 10,220 units. And as these two match, we can say that our question is right. With this, we are done with this question. So what is unique about this question is that normal loss is due to evaporation. So we need to know that evaporation is something that will happen every time during the process. So this is a normal loss, and you will realize no value on evaporation. So our normal loss realization is going to be 0. With this, we are done with question number 2. You can find and download the solutions to the problems we solved in today's video in the description below. With this, we are done and dusted with the chapter process costing. Next up, we have contract costing.
Many times, we learn a lot of things we don't know where to use. So I've made it a point that every chapter I teach, I will try and tell you guys its practicality and how it is used in real life or work scenarios. We should all try and make this a habit. When we learn something, we also read and research about where this can be put to use and how it can be put to use. This helps us in many ways. 1. It tells you what you're studying and why you need to study it. 2. It gives you an opportunity to explore if this is your area of interest. And 3. When the situation arises, you know you are prepared for it or have learned for it. Because it does happen that we learn something, don't know what we learnt it for. And then later, when we come across a situation where we can actually use what we have learnt, we don't. Only because of the reason we don't realize what we learnt is to be used here. Many industries use process costs. In fact, a process costing system can usually be devised in all industries except where job, batch, or unit operation cost is necessary. Examples of a few of these industries: the chemical works, soap making, box making, paper mills, biscuit works, oil refining like we saw in today's problem, textile, food products, paint and ink, meat, dairy products, etc. Why do industries use process costs, or what is the advantage of process costing? To determine process costs periodically at short intervals, unit costs can be computed weekly or even daily if overhead rates are used as predetermined basis. It is simple and less expensive to find out the process cost. It is possible to have managerial control by elevating the performance of each process. It is necessary to allocate the expense to processes in order to have accurate costs. It is easy to quote prices with standardization of processes. Standard costing is established easily in process type of manufacturing. But there are a few disadvantages of process costing too. Here are a few. Costs obtained at the end of the accounting period are of historical value and are not very useful for effective control. Work in progress is required to be ascertained to calculate the cost of continuous process. Valuation of work in progress is done on estimated basis, which introduces inaccuracies in total cost. There is a wide scope of errors while calculating the average cost. Computation of average cost is more difficult when there is more than one type of product and division of cost elements is necessary. Now, you know that if you want to start an industry or launch a product, you will likely have to use process costing to account. Just the way we solved all the sums so far, you can do the same with the original values instead of imaginary values from a question.
Hope you learned something new and these unique questions add a few more tricks up your sleeve. Like, share, and subscribe. I'll see you all in my next chapter, contract costing.